Hello and welcome back to In the Dugout and to episode, I believe, is it 11? 12?
Yeah.
Episode 12.
You got that first time.
Welcome to the Dugout Debate, the most professional show on the internet. I'm joined by Alex and Josh once again. How are you doing, lads?
Oh, not great to be honest after another draw for United, but hey ho.
I'm doing very well after another draw for United.
Well, we are
He
also
says, touch wood.
We're after you.
we are also joined by the holy prophet himself, Leslie Reed.
He's done it.
Doth bestow upon thee 1 win in 7 games.
You couldn't have got a bigger picture.
It's just how my printer worked.
What, postcards only?
But we have absolutely no time to waste. We're going to jump in with our first round called Picture This. And this week our picture is of a slightly deflated looking Arsene Wenger because apparently all the pictures I choose are about Arsenal. So what could be going on in this picture, lads?
I'll kick us off. Is it Wenger just staring at his legacy?
Oh.
Is it your face when construction at a stadium distracts your team from their very deserved win?
Cheers, Ty.
Is Wenger giving some touchline advice to 5'6" Santi Cazorla?
Is he not still injured?
That's not the point.
Or is Wenger doing his best impression of Harry Redknapp when he realises that Nico Crankshaw still has 3 years on his contract at Rangers, so he can't sign him yet?
Or is Wenger lamenting the exact moment that his Viagra's kicked in?
I did not see it.
But he sure as hell felt it.
It's because he can't undo his trouser zip.
Yeah, he's fumbling about. No, of course, it's Wenger looking a bit upset following Arsenal's 2-0 loss in the latest North London derby.
That's correct. The North London derby was hosted yesterday. It was the final one to be hosted at White Hart Lane. So I'm going to turn to you first, Alex. Does this result sort of show that Arsenal's dominance in North London is perhaps over? Because it's now assured that this will be the first time Spurs finish above them in 22 years. So could this be a turning point in the future for both clubs?
I think so, definitely, yeah. I think that, especially if Arsene Wenger stays on, which the more the season's going on, for some reason, surprisingly, it kind of seems increasingly likely that he's actually going to sign a new contract, which baffles me, but that's by the by. I think that what Pochettino's done at Tottenham has been absolutely unbelievable, and I think that following last season where they did choke, being, the whole coming third in a 2-horse race thing and end up finishing below Arsenal, despite having played better than them for the majority of the season, I think this is really the point at which they've showed the potential that they've had in the last couple of seasons. The Tottenham side is amazing, and Arsenal shouldn't necessarily feel embarrassed to be finishing below Tottenham just because Tottenham are being unbelievable this season. And I think that it's hardly surprising when you look at the two teams and you think about the fact that, realistically speaking, only Alexis Sanchez would get from the Arsenal team into the Tottenham team, probably. I don't think it comes as any surprise that Tottenham have finally started to build up a little bit of dominance over Arsenal. And given how young that Spurs side is as well, if they can keep hold of their players, I think this really will spell kind of, even if it's only a small era, a bit of an era of dominance for Spurs in the North London sort of area.
Fair assessment. And Josh, I'll turn to you to talk a bit more about Spurs and more about their move away from White Hart Lane at the end of the season. They're going to be playing all their home games at Wembley, which if I were a Spurs fan, I wouldn't be too pleased about, given their run of form there. So how do you think Spurs will fare next season after losing their home? Do you think it'll be a similar situation to West Ham this season?
Well, I think where Spurs and West Ham are differing is that West Ham went straight from Upton Park to the Olympic Stadium without any transition period, whereas Spurs had that kind of overlap of playing their Champions League games at Wembley and leaving their domestic games for White Hart Lane. So I think they will be more used to playing at Wembley Stadium. The fans are going to be more used to playing at Wembley Stadium. So I think Sorry?
The fans are playing at Wembley.
Well, at Spurs playing at Wembley. So I think the transition will be far easier for Tottenham than it was for West Ham.
And I imagine that Spurs will probably end up doing better than West Ham have this season. I mean, West Ham have just been absolutely
You'd expect
awful.
so,
Yeah.
wouldn't you?
Yeah,
Just
you
when they
would.
have a track go around it.
It may well do. I can't remember. It might be like a purpose-built one.
It may
No
have a
track, no problem. That's how it works.
it may have a stray stage from, I don't know, Justin Bieber's latest concert or something. I don't know.
Just to build on what Alex was saying about Arsenal, though, about Sanchez probably being the only player that would get into the Spurs side, if you actually just look at the three title-winning sides of Arsene Wenger's compared to the squad now, I think that the changes are immense, and I think it's almost to the point where you can say, to a certain extent it is Arsene Wenger getting his tactics slightly wrong or whatever the reason may be, but also because the players just aren't as good as he was managing before. Like, just take the 1997-98 team. We got David Seaman in goal, Lee Dixon, Tony Adams, Steve Bold, Nigel Winterburn in defence, Ray Parlour, Emmanuel Petit, Patrick Vieira, Mark Overmars in midfield, and Ian Wright and Dennis Bergkamp up front. And then 2001-2 season, David Seaman in goal again, Ashley Cole, Sol Campbell, Martin Keown and Lauren in defence, Ray Parlour, Patrick Vieira, Robert Perez, Frederick Lundberg in midfield, Sylvain Wiltord and Thierry Henry up front. And then Invincible season, Jens Lehmann in goal, Ashley Cole, Sol Campbell, Kolo Touré, Lauren in defence, Gilberto, Patrick Vieira, Perez and Lundberg in midfield and Bergkamp and Henry up front. They're insane squads. If you look at this squad now, you've got Petr Cech in goal. He's probably, I would argue, the only position in which Arsenal are stronger now than they were in previous seasons. Then you've got Kieran Gibbs, Lauren Koscielny, Shkodran Mustafi and Hector Bellerin. They're not bad, but I just don't think that they're the same classic defenders that Arsenal are used to. And then in midfield, Alex Iwobi, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, Francis Coquelin, Granit Xhaka, Mesut Ozil in midfield, and Alexis Sanchez up front. Sanchez has only just become a striker, for God's sake. They were used to having Henry, who I think he's the top scorer in Arsenal's history, and Ian Wright even, on whose record Henry took over. So if you want to compare Arsene Wenger now to Arsene Wenger back in the glory days, I think you have to look at not just what he's doing differently or the same, but the players at the same time.
But equally, there's a point to be made that as much as there is no way with the overall squad that he's got, he could pick a squad that's anywhere near the level of those three squads that you just named. He's also not, in my opinion, picking the best players that he could pick for the games. Obviously Sanchez has been something of a revelation at striker, but why on earth he's still not picking Danny Welbeck, who could have stretched that Spurs defence, for example, yesterday, is beyond me. Because when Welbeck's played this season, he's actually been pretty good. And I know he's had injury issues, but in the latter parts of the season, when he's been given a chance, he's actually done something with it. And why he's still not playing is beyond me. And also in defence, I think he still played a three at the back yesterday, but I can't remember what game it was in. I think it was in the game before the Spurs game where he gave Rob Holding a chance. And Holding, for all the criticism that people gave of him as like a poor signing, looked very calm, very composed on the ball and put in a very, very decent performance. And then off the back of a very good performance, then didn't get picked. And I can't get my head around what Arsene Wenger's process for picking his teams is, but I think that as much as he's not working with as good stuff as he used to, I think he's also not making the most of what he is working with. And I think that, to me, shows almost how out of touch his tactics are.
Just a personal note as well. I don't think Francis Coquelin belongs anywhere near a team that should be challenging for the title. I mean, he's just been absolutely dreadful this season, but that's just...
So is Granit Xhaka, to be fair.
Yeah, Xhaka has issues with his what's the word? His discipline. That's the word.
Yeah.
But I feel like we've spoken about Arsenal far too much on this channel, and I'm sure
Thanks to you.
all the loving Arsenal fans who are subscribed to this channel, i.e. none, are fed up of hearing us talk about how awful their team have been this season.
Are Arsenal big in Africa, Chris?
They're not even big in England anymore.
Okay, well, I feel like we should move on, and we'll move on to a side who we've not really spoken about too much on this channel, and that is Burnley, who picked up their first away win of the season yesterday, I believe it was, when they beat Crystal Palace 2-0 at Selhurst Park. But this has sort of been overshadowed by events in the past few days, which has emerged regarding football's most How I can't even think of words to describe him.
most
Joey
famous,
Barton.
Controversial
Joey
character.
Barton.
Revered, inspirational, influential.
He is to football what MLK was to civil rights.
Couldn't have put it better. Your boy Joey Barton.
But yes, with Joey Barton, this is just just one small component in a long line of discrepancies that have appeared over his tarnished football career, if you can call it a career. So, Josh, I'll turn to you first with this individual. Do you think...
It's like a teacher.
I refuse to call him a professional player because he does not deserve to be one. My question to you, Josh, is should he be permanently banned from football? Not just for this, but for all the things that he has done over the past few years and so on.
I think so, yeah, because if you go back to Wayne Shaw at Sutton when he was fired for supposedly fixing that pie-eating scandal, or passy as Alex was trying to insist, and that was on a lower scale club. I think the fifth highest division, whereas Joey Barton, he was at Rangers, and if I'm not wrong, they fired him for exactly the same reason of this match fixing scandal. So then Burnley thought, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll sign him as well.
We'll sign him back.
And then what happens? He gets fined. He gets charged for the exact same thing. So yeah, I think he's had way too many chances in his career. And the thing is, I don't think he's that bad a footballer, but he just lets far too many things get in the way of what could have been a half decent career. So I think absolutely he should be banned for life, just because not only that, he's got a responsibility as a professional footballer in the Premier League to set an example, and he's not doing that.
You know you're awful when you're trying to cheat your way into a free kick when you're playing Lincoln City in the quarterfinal. Was it the quarterfinal? No, the round of 16 of the FA Cup.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said, though, in terms of Joey Barton and the betting scandal, because he has cited that it is something of an addiction. This doesn't make me feel necessarily that much more sorry for him because, like I say, this isn't a blip in a career. This is a career full of controversies and full of stuff. And it wouldn't come as a surprise to anybody if we were like, Joey Barton's an arsehole, because Joey Barton is a bit of an arsehole. But I think that one of the reasons I think he should totally take a ban out from football is because I do believe that he may actually have a gambling addiction, which is what he cited. And given, his previous dealings with, getting sacked from other clubs from it, I think it's entirely possible. But if that's the case, he needs to, not only for the sake of, the club and for the league, he also needs for the sake of himself to, maybe get out and get sorted with that, if that is the case. And also, it's almost paradoxical in the sense of the Premier League makes so much money from betting because it's seen as like a clean league. Because, like, for example, the Serie A had so much controversy over the course of the last couple of decades with match fixing and stuff like that. Whereas the Premier League's not really ever faced a controversy on that scale, so it's able to make loads of money through betting because people are willing to bet on it. And the sort of cyclical thing is the fact that Joey Barton gambling could affect the gambling if it's match fixing. So for the sake of the Premier League's revenue as well, they need to make sure they take firm action against that so they maintain that financial income from the betting companies.
And I feel like that's enough to say about Joey Barton, really. So we'll turn to his club, Burnley, because they deserve to have a mention. They've been incredibly good this season, especially at home. But do you feel that they've been slightly unlucky away? Because, of course, this is their first away win of the season when there's only 3 games to go now after this weekend's fixtures. So what do you think has happened with Burnley's away form, and where do you think they can improve for looking ahead at next season?
I don't think they can be too disappointed in what they've achieved this season. They are 10th, let's not forget. And that's an incredible achievement for a side that's not been in the Premier League for very long. Yeah.
Are you sure? I thought Bournemouth were in 10th.
I'll have a look. Carry on.
I thought they were 10th when I...
Carry on talking to Josh, I'll have a look.
No, they're 14th. They're 14th.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, Bournemouth are in 10th.
My bad. Anyway, okay, so they're in 14th.
You're forgiven.
Thanks. They're in 14th, which is a decent position for a side that's just, not been in the Premier League for very long. So I think away form aside, their home form has been pretty decent, and they managed a win against Everton and a goalless draw at home to United. So I think, I think the home form is probably the more important out of the two. So I don't think that they should really be too concerned about their away form. They're perfectly safe, and I think Sean Dyche has something really, really strong to build upon for next season.
I actually worry for Burnley next season, just purely because I think the reason they've been solid, perhaps at home, obviously not so much away, but definitely at home, is because they are a team that has a spine that plays pretty much game in, game out, and is solid. And you're looking at the sort of likes of, you're looking at Tom Heaton in goal, who's been excellent this season, as has Michael Keane. Somebody who I think is actually severely underrated. And whenever I kind of watch Burnley play, which isn't often, he seems to do something usually fairly decent every game. That's George Boyd, who I was especially impressed with in the game against Crystal Palace yesterday. He provided a beautiful assist for Andre Gray. And obviously, like I say, Andre Gray. And they've got another striker as well who scores one of their goals.
Vokes and Barnes are the other two strikers.
Ashley Barnes and Sam Vokes, yeah, of course. So they've got a spine to that team, but I worry for them in the sense of I feel like they're at risk of losing quite a few of those players.
Yeah, Keane's touted with going to Everton, I think. Keane.
Yeah, like there are plenty of Heaton's like touted to go to various different clubs because he's been so solid this season. He's 28, I think. So I think there's time for him to play for like another decade potentially if he's a good goalkeeper. Michael Keane will almost certainly leave in the summer. And I think the only two players that I think are genuinely the only player that I think is genuinely actually quality that's left in that team is Andre Gray. And he might stay because of his like the controversy that came upon him like earlier in the season about homophobia and stuff like that. But I mean, if you're losing your two main defensive players, you're going to struggle. And I think that they might struggle to replace that kind of quality. So it'll be interesting. It depends where they reinvest that money, but I do worry for them next season because it could be difficult if those two players leave.
And hopefully they will do a decent enough job to stay up, because we need more claret and blue teams in the top flight.
Well, I think two's enough, to be honest.
Okay, then West Ham can go. That's fine. So we come on to another one of our weekly features, which is the number of the week, which this week is number 4. So lads, what could number 4 mean?
I'll start off with this one. Is the number 4 a joke that Arsenal fans wish was still relevant?
Is it how many members of the Jackson 5 were surplus to requirements?
The Jackson 4 are releasing some top-class hits, I'll have you know.
It's for the absolute youngest that Adam Johnson will go.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yes, come on, Lappy, be realistic. 4.5.
My next one's equally as bad, so I've got so...
Well, maybe this will take the heat off a bit. Is it below what position are Liverpool going to finish this season?
No, that hasn't taken any heat off. I was going to say how many times someone actually has to say no before Ched Evans actually takes them seriously.
He was found not guilty.
Yeah, sure, that was a great decision, that.
Any ideas on the actual answer here, boys?
Is the number of times that Sunderland have been relegated from the Premier League in the history of the division, which is a record.
That's correct. Sunderland now have an unwanted record on their books. They have now been relegated 4 times from the Premier League since it was rebranded in '92, courtesy of a 1-0 defeat at the hands of Bournemouth at the Stadium of Light. So I feel like we've spoken a little bit about how poor Sunderland have been this season. So where do their problems lie, Josh? I'll turn to you first.
Personally, I will probably, even though earlier on in the season I thought that Moyes would be able to keep them up, I think it's now become evidently clear that he is very much a middle of the table team manager. If you look at what he did do with Everton, despite picking them up from the depths of despair when he first joined, he didn't. He was very good at sort of keeping the same old, sort of slowly progressing. But with a team like Sunderland, who have been just down the bottom pretty much since they came back up 10 years ago, I think that the way in which the Sunderland board have failed to actually get a manager that's able to make any progress, even Allardyce, who's the sort of the Harry Houdini of keeping teams just about up, even like Roy Keane, who quit partway through one of the seasons, Martin O'Neill they let go. Probably slightly unfairly, Ricky Sabraggio, God knows what on earth he was doing at Sunderland. But, I mean, like Gus Poyet, Paolo Di Canio,
Don't forget Big
they've
Dick
had no
Advocat.
consistency. They've not been very shrewd in their managerial decisions. I think much like with Aston Villa, it's something that's been set. The rot has set for a long time.
It's rotted.
And
It's a fish rots head. A fish rots from the head downwards. You mean?
Sorry.
A fish rots from the head downwards. So otherwise, it started with the board being foolish in their decisions, and then that just sort of seeped down into the manager and then the players and the
that
fans.
That wasn't the thing I was going for, but if the shoe fits.
But it's just Sorry, you go.
No, that's okay.
Okay. I was just gonna say as well. I think it's also a case of just like, I think it's the most obvious. Again, every time we talk about Sunderland, we have to preface everything we say with this is the most obvious piece of analysis that the world could ever see. But they rely far too heavily upon Jermaine Defoe, who may well not be there next season. Like I'm looking at, they scored 26 goals in the Premier League this season, Sunderland. Jermaine Defoe scored 14 of those goals. There is nobody else on that team, especially going forward, that is helping him out with goals whatsoever.
I don't think any other players broken into double figures with Sunderland.
No one else even got close. And 14 goals, don't get me wrong, if you've got a 14, 15 goal a season striker, that's great. But that's not enough to keep the side up if you've got nothing else going for you in the team. And look, and when you think through most teams, you can think of there's a little bit of quality somewhere. And apart from Jermaine Defoe, Sunderland have absolutely no quality whatsoever. And I think that going on to the point where Josh was kind of saying that they had no consistency with managers, I think that perhaps David Moyes might end up providing a little bit of consistency if he manages to get them back up, because he has come out and said if he doesn't, lose his job, he would like to stay at Sunderland. He'd like to guide them through the Championship and perhaps, push them back up to the Premier League. And if he does that, then I feel like rebuilding from that sort of way down might be a good way of providing a bit more stability for Sunderland as a club going forward. So if they do keep David Moyes, I think that they perhaps may end up, in a couple of seasons' time being better off for having done so, despite what it's looking like right now.
That was going to be my next question, actually.
Next season.
It was going to be my next question, actually.
Yeah. So what was that, Chris?
It was going to be my next question, talking about whether they should stick with Moyes or get someone else. I mean, there's talk of Gary Monk being axed by Leeds for not making the playoffs with the Lily Whites. So is it the Lily Whites or is it just the Whites? I can't remember.
Just the Whites.
Just the Whites. So I don't know. Perhaps they should stick with Moyes and he can prove himself as, I say, perhaps rebuild his reputation to try and bring Sunderland back up after this relegation.
Could I just really quickly make a note? You mentioned that they play Bournemouth, and we never ever talk about Bournemouth, so I won't go into it.
The last time we spoke about Bournemouth was I think it was the first time I hosted when it was that 6-3 with Everton, and
yeah. We never talk about them, and they're not doing anything particularly exciting. They're just being solid mid-table, whatever. Josh King has been unbelievable the last couple of months.
He's now
absolutely unreal.
He's now only the second Norwegian to have got 15 goals in a Premier League season.
Yeah, he reached 15 goals
after Solskjaer, I think.
Yeah, he reached 15 goals with that goal against that sent Sunderland down. I just want to make a really quick note that if he continues to fire next season, because they struggled when they lost Callum Wilson, Bournemouth, at the start of the season, which has been really unfortunate for them. If he can fire next season and Bournemouth continue to be solid, people underrate Bournemouth. And I'd be interested to see how that team goes next season if they manage to keep hold of him, because he's been excellent the last few months.
They've looked far more secure this season, and they've been able to sort of defy the typical second season syndrome. But we spoke a little bit about Sunderland going down, so now we're going to talk about teams that could be coming up as we look at the playoffs in the 3 EFL leagues. So naturally, the first place to start is with the Championship, as Brighton and Newcastle have been confirmed automatically. That leaves us with our 4 playoff contenders, those being Reading, Sheffield Wednesday, Huddersfield, and realistically Fulham, because of the vastly superior goal difference over Leeds. So where do you think... we don't know the fixtures yet, but who do you think could be coming up out of those 4 teams, lads?
I think Sheffield Wednesday might do it. I think whoever wins out of Sheffield Wednesday or Huddersfield, because that's looking like the likely fixture, because it's 3rd versus 6th and then 4th versus 5th. I think whoever wins that fixture will go on to win the whole playoff. So if just looking at Sheffield Wednesday's amazing goal difference and lack of goals conceded. Really, I think those signs are indicating that it's a very strong chance that they could end up going up. Obviously, Fulham have an even better goal difference, but they're still 4 points behind. So I think it's very possible that Sheffield Wednesday could take it.
I mean, I can't really disagree with any of that. Looking at it statistically, I think that I don't know.
Fulham are the league's top scorers, I believe. They've scored 82.
The 83.
83 now. Okay.
83, which is
83.
one more than Newcastle.
Mm.
I know. I think it's a tough one to call because I think it'll obviously, like Josh said, it'll be Reading, Fulham, and Sheffield versus Huddersfield. It's tough because I don't follow the Championship massively, but looking at sort of the way that teams have played, looking at the statistics and stuff like that, Sheffield Wednesday do seem to have sort of a more solid backbone than the likes of Reading, Huddersfield, and Fulham, assuming obviously that Fulham stay in the playoffs, barring some miracle. And I think that when you go into the playoffs, when you're playing over the course of a couple of legs or you're playing at a big occasion or whatever, I think solidity means far more than scoring goals. I think if you nab a goal, you can just sit back, and I think that Wednesday have far more of a capacity to do that than the other three teams. So I can't really disagree with Josh in terms of what he said there.
Well, now we come to League One, which is the only playoff round that has actually had fixtures confirmed. We have Scunthorpe, who've been finished in third, facing sixth place Millwall, and fourth Fleetwood taking on fifth place Bradford. So, Alex, I'll start with you. Who do you think could be getting through out of those four teams, and be playing in the Championship next season?
See, this one's tougher because it's a lot closer. In a sense of obviously,
we actually know who's going to be facing who. You mean?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think points difference is a bit closer as well, because you'd expect, obviously, with the way that the playoffs are set out, that it would end up being again a Scunthorpe versus Fleetwood final, and there's really very, very little to separate the two teams. They've got a fairly similar goal difference. Scunthorpe's is slightly better, but Fleetwood again are more solid at the back. And for me, like I say, I think that that makes more of a difference. I'm just trying to find the form guide to see where they both are. And Scunthorpe have been better than Fleetwood. Scunthorpe have won a few more points than Fleetwood in the last few games, and form again is massive going into that playoff season. So Scunthorpe, I think I would back them to win it just purely because of their form and the fact that going into it, that I think they've got a bit more confidence in the sense that they've won more games going into that game. But it's impossible to call that one.
And I feel like now we should turn to the absolute mess that is the League Two playoffs, because we have just so many teams that are battling it out for those 6th and 7th places. Luton and Exeter are already confirmed. Meanwhile, we have battling out for 6th and 7th. We have Carlisle, Blackpool, Stevenage, Cambridge, Colchester, Wickham, and Mansfield. It's so tight. I mean, where do we go? Who's going to make it? We just don't know. So, what could happen with this?
Immediately speaking, I think that, and I was talking to you just before this, the only team out of the ones that are still fighting for that I think are the closest thing to a dead cert to go up are Blackpool, just purely because Blackpool are currently sitting in a playoff spot, and that means that if they win, they're basically going to go up, and because they've got a 14 better goal difference than Stevenage, who are on the same points as them, but obviously behind on goal difference. And Blackpool are playing Orient, and Orient obviously have had nightmares with the way the club's being run this season, and as a result are sitting rock bottom of League Two, looking like they're going to go down to the National League.
They've already been confirmed, by the way.
Yeah. So you'd absolutely have to back Blackpool to win that game, and obviously, like I say, if Blackpool won that game, they get into the playoffs. So Blackpool are the only team that I would say are an absolute dead cert to make that playoff spot, because even though Carlisle are above them by a point, Carlisle are playing Exeter, and Exeter recently have been unbelievable. Their form second half of the season has been absolutely red hot, and they're playing Exeter at home. And Exeter, whilst having had massive problems playing at St James Park earlier in the season, have been really, really solid in the second half of the season. Paul Tisdale's really got them sort of figuring out how to play for the fans and playing in such a way that, Tashi tends to score them quite a lot of goals. So I think Carlisle will struggle, and the only reason I struggle to call that one is because Exeter are already confirmed. Regardless of what they do, they're going to be fifth.
Do you have anything to add to that,
They don't
Josh?
have too much to play for.
Well, yeah, I'd say what will be interesting is who will gain the psychological advantage ahead of the Exeter Carlisle match, because you would have to think whoever wins that tie will go on to win the playoff tie, because that's looking, generally speaking, like that's a possibility with fifth playing sixth. That said, with Exeter's playoff place secure, there is a chance that they might relax slightly
and field some younger players
to give themselves a bit more energy for the playoff tie. So I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, think that it's definite that Carlisle will finish sixth and Exeter will take the tie or whatever. I think it's very possible that Blackpool could still overtake them.
And that rounds off what I feel was a slightly unfair bit of analysis to just
15 minutes before recording.
to push on you 15 minutes before we started. So
yeah, exactly.
So now we turn to the actual dugout debate, and this week I decided to opt for the worst Premier League panic buy. So essentially any player who was bought on the deadline day of any transfer window in the Premier League and just turned out to be absolutely dreadful, or there was no reason in buying them, anything like that. So I'll turn to you first, Josh. Who's your pick?
I'm going for the mass of hair that is Marouane Fellaini and his rather desperate transfer to Manchester United from Everton in 2013. Courtesy of yours truly, David Moyes. Moyes had taken over a title-winning team from the legendary Sir Alex Ferguson. Perhaps slightly aging. The issue with David Moyes is that his name does not have the same power that Ferguson's name does. So when someone says David Moyes is calling for you, or Alex Ferguson's calling for you, there's going to be a difference. And he was trying to sign Fabregas and Gareth Bale for world record fees or God knows what, and they weren't going. So he turns his old club, Marouane Fellaini, he'd done pretty well at Everton, but it was by no means anything to suggest that he'd be able to prove himself at a top club, and not just a top club, a club aiming to defend their title. Also, United had lost Paul Scholes to retirement at the end of the 2012-13 season, and Fellaini is by no stretch of the imagination a like-for-like replacement for Paul Scholes. I think with Michael Carrick still in the squad, yes, Fellaini obviously has that height advantage, and he's very powerful in the air, but I just don't think it was a position that United particularly needed filling at the moment in time. And even as that season progressed, he did not do anything at all. I think he got sent off within 2 months of being at United in the Champions League match. And it wasn't until the following season that he actually began to start scoring. And I think he's only got 8 goals in the 4 seasons he's been at United. And one final thing I'll just add is that as a sort of progression into the rebuttal part of the debate, I like to just say that I don't always think that panic buy is the fault of the player. I think a massive part of it has to go to the manager. And I don't think that Moyes utilised Fellaini in the Manchester United squad in the same way, firstly, that he had at Everton, and secondly, that Louis van Gaal and now Jose Mourinho are doing now at United. So
that's a fair assessment and a fair choice. But now we turn to you, Alex. Who's your pick?
So my pick also took place in 2013, and it is the transfer deadline day signing of Christopher Samba by QPR, obviously on transfer deadline day for £12 million. Now, the reason I picked this because, you can kind of understand the reasoning behind Harry Redknapp wanting a centre-back, obviously king of the transfer dedeadline deal and definitely not a Wheeler dealer. But with QPR basically rock bottom in the Premier League and leaking loads of goals, he turned to the board and he was like, I need a centre-back. And instead of getting, a good centre-back, he got Christopher Samba. They paid £12 million to Anzi Makachkala, or however you pronounce it. And they offered the guy 100k a week wages. This is a club that's bottom of the Premier League, 100k a week wages. And they bought him when he hadn't played really at all for Anzi and was only, in their own words, 40% fit. And so they brought in this centre-back who's supposed to shore up their defence. He couldn't really play for a while because he was only 40% fit. he only actually played in 10 of QPR's games, and a lot of them weren't even full games. And lo and behold, his defensive contribution made QPR still finish bottom of the league with the third most goals conceded in the league that season. And they sold him back to Anzi at the end of the season again. So, in my opinion, a buy that did absolutely nothing. He came for 6 months. He cost them money in wages. Somehow they managed to sell him for £12 million again, so they didn't lose anything in actual transfer fees, but just the most pointless panic transfer I've ever seen.
How many appearances did he make for QPR, sorry?
10 in the league, apparently.
Okay, well, I have one that can one-up that. I bring you a player who only made 3 appearances.
Is this
only
only
one
of deadline day transfer?
He only made 3 appearances, one of which was a start. May I present to you Konstantinos Mitroglou and his January deadline day 2014 move to Fulham for £12 million. He'd been pretty impressive in his time at Olympiacos, scoring 41 goals in 92 games. And Fulham looked to have got a pretty decent striker when they signed him. But the problem was that, similarly to Chris Samba, he was just not fit when they signed him. And like I said, only made 3 appearances, just one of which was a start. And Fulham ended up being relegated anyway. He then went on to move back to Olympiacos on loan, and then following that Benfica as well. He scored 16 in 24 for his loan spell at Olympiacos, and then 20 in 32 at Benfica, which prompted Benfica to then sign him permanently for, I think it was €7 million. But the fact that Fulham had brought in this player who they knew at the time was not fit to play, and this is a record signing for the Cottagers as well. £12 million for a team who were battling relegation, and similarly to Chris Samba, was on ridiculous wages. It baffles me that they picked him when he just wasn't fit to play. So now we come to our rebuttal part of the debate, and similarly to the previous few weeks, we can't really deny that any of these aren't like terrible panic buys.
Chris is going safe with his debate options these days because he was a little bit embarrassed in the first few episodes of this.
I defended the 1953 FA Cup final as best I could.
In fact, you didn't fancy sort of Northampton Town transfer from 1902 or something for like £1.
The Premier League didn't exist then, Josh. Premier League didn't exist then. So, just to talk about Fellaini, what did you say his goal scoring stats were as of now?
Got 8 goals and 87 appearances.
I feel like that's not really a fair way of judging him based on the fact that he is a centre mid, more defensive mid. But
I'm judging the panic buy based on his first season under Moyes, really.
That's a fair point, but you can say that Moyes had his reasons to turn to his former club, surely.
Well, he was trying to sign Leighton Baines and Fellaini in a joint transfer, both of which made absolutely no sense to me. We didn't need to fill either of those positions. So,
if I'm in terms of rebuttal, the issue that I have with, again, I think both of yours were horrific panic buys, but the issue that I have with both of yours, in comparison to Chris Samba, is the fact that you can kind of understand why QPR wanted a centre back, but you can't understand why on earth they went for Chris Samba, whereas although your two players both kind of turned out to be flops, I think at the time, you could totally understand why those transfers were being made in terms of the players that they were signing. Like, I've got the stats for both of them up here, and in the season before Fulham signed him, Mitroglou scored 17 goals in the Portuguese league. Now, obviously, the Portuguese league is not the Premier League.
You mean the Greek league?
The Greek league, sorry, my bad. He's in the Portuguese league now, in the Greek league. And in the Greek league, again, it was also not the Premier League. But if they could bring him in, and physical strikers do tend to do all right in the Premier League, and he's 6'2" and he's a target man, that's his style of play. And if they could bring him in, he could score them 12, 13 goals a season. That's a decent cop for 12 million. And I think that I could totally understand why they signed him. The fact that he was unfit obviously works a lot in your favour, because that was a big part of it. I remember one of the games he sort of came on when it was quite a tight game.
It was, I think it was a...
And it was a tight game, and Roddy Jaeger had been pressing for Fulham the whole game and making it different. And Mitroglou came on, put in no effort. And
It was
Fulham
their
just lost.
1-1 draw with West Brom, I think it was his
Yeah,
first
something like that.
appearance for
Um,
them.
So obviously the fitness worked in your favour. And in terms of Fellaini, he'd had an absolutely excellent season at Everton the season before. And obviously, like you said, it's not his fault that he was played in a different place at United. In Everton, he was featuring as kind of almost like a centre-forward role. But again, you can kind of understand why Manchester United signed him. I don't really know what role he was supposed to fit in the team, but he looked like a good player and he could fit in. But obviously signing him to play him in the wrong position and then playing him in the wrong position ended up turning out wrong. So, like I say, my main piece of rebuttal is the difference between not having a clue why on earth you'd sign Christopher Samba as a centre-back and sort of them being less terrible panic buys in the sense of at the time you could see why Fulham and United signed those two players.
I think
Chris Samba was a solid centre-back for Blackburn before going to Russia and then coming back to England with QPR, though.
Yeah, he was Premier League proven at when he was with Blackburn.
But the issue was he was Premier League proven, but when he left Blackburn, he was already getting on a bit, and they sold him to Russia because he'd started to decline in form already. He'd done that thing that happens to all the good Premier League centre backs, where they lose the yard of pace, and if you're not a quality defender, that's when your career starts to go. And he'd already done that by the time he left Blackburn. He'd then spent like a season and a half, 2 seasons at Annecy, and then after that had come back. Like he was already a decent Premier League defender on the decline when he left. And then they signed him back 2 seasons later. And it's not like he'd been performing in Russia either.
Yeah, like, he does perform in Russia, though. Let's face it.
Yeah, but exactly. But what I'm saying is, why would you bother? Like, if we're trying to argue why on earth sign Christopher Samba, sure. If you were a team that's absolutely struggling to not concede a goal, and you signed him when he was just kind of on the decline 2 seasons before from Blackburn because he still had some defending quality, fair enough. But he'd spent a season and a half, 2 seasons, basically playing on the bench for Annecy, who weren't that good anyway, and he was 40% fit as a result of having not played. So there's absolutely no reason at that current point in time, where Christopher Samba could be remotely considered a good centre-back.
I think where Mitroglou is slightly different from Chris Samba, though, is the fact that his injury problems continued to plague him in his time with Fulham, and then they ended up trying to ship him out after they'd been relegated, obviously because they want him off the wage bill. And eventually they did, and they only ended up making, I think it was 7 million euros from when they eventually sold him to Benfica. But if I'm correct, QPR ended up selling Chris Samba back to Annecy for the same that they bought it for. So you could see why financially, when they eventually sold Mitroglou on, that's still a very it's a considerable amount of money to have lost on a player.
Yeah, but equally, what wages was Mitroglou on? I know you said they were ridiculous.
I don't know.
I
don't know exactly what they were, but
because
for
I'd
a championship club,
if Fulham were able to provide 100k a week, which is what Chris Samba was on. And even though they sold him back for the same amount, fair play, they lost half a season in 100k wages. And I know QPR, especially at that time, I'm not sure exactly now, but at that time they kind of had a decent ownership, they had decent investment. But 100k a week is a lot for a team at the bottom.
But this is Harry Redknapp. This is Harry Redknapp. Finances are always going to be dodgy.
Granted, but it doesn't take away from the fact that, even financially speaking, the buy was terrible.
Yeah.
But you see, to me, I don't think the signing of Christopher Samba was necessarily all just down to his ability. I think if you look at the QPR centre-backs that were there, I mean, Clint Hill, Neda Manua, and Tal Ben Hayim, they'd hardly set the world alight in the Premier League or in other divisions that they'd been in previously. So I think even just from an experience point of view, I think Christopher Samba, in theory, was a half-decent signing. Whereas if you go back to Marouane Fellaini, he had no experience in a top team. He'd been, I think, Standard Liège before Everton, I think. The Belgian league's not much to talk about. Everton had been bumbling around the Europa League spots and just below. And like I said before, it was almost like a last resort for David Moyes. Like, no one else is going to come, therefore I'll go for the one player that's definitely going to come and play for me, which is Marouane Fellaini, because he was trying to sign a world-class player, and Fellaini is not a world-class player, and therefore, at a world-class club like Manchester United, if you start signing these players just for the sake of it, it just makes you look a bit stupid. Really.
There is a reason why he's been nicknamed £27.5 million batshit Belgian flop.
Well, yeah,
But
that
was
really catchy
where
nickname.
yeah,
Uh,
where Mitroglou differs from both of them, however, is that he had absolutely no experience in the not just the Premier League in England at all. Because Samba, of course, had been with Blackburn, and like you said, Fellaini had been with Everton. Whereas Mitroglou had been before moving to Fulham. Obviously, he'd been with Olympiacos, but he'd also been with I think it was Mönchengladbach's youth academy, which I mean I don't really know too much about Mönchengladbach's youth development, the German teams tend to do all right with that. But with these goals that Mitroglou has been scoring, admittedly they're not in very competitive leagues at all, but there was clearly a talent there, and Fulham knew exactly what they were letting themselves into when they signed him with his fitness problems. So there was I don't know exactly which other strikers would have been available, but you'd surely be turning to Premier League or even
Hugo Rodallega.
Championship before. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
Hadn't they loaned Dimitar Berbatov out?
I can't remember honestly.
well, the thing is,
That alone is a
if anything,
stupid decision.
if anything, I feel like that what you just said almost works against him being a better panic buy, because like in terms of panic buy, it was a panic buy, but they sort of took a risk. It was a panic buy, that no one's denying that, but it was a panic buy that could well have worked out. I know they knew he had fitness problems, but he had been scoring goals and they saw a talent there. And clearly he is a talented player. Like obviously he's not doing it in a top league, but even now he's been absolutely excellent for Benfica.
Benfica alone took a punt on him as well, and it worked out for them. So there's obviously this quality there. But
yeah,
so the fact
like,
that he was
again,
the fact he was
understand.
unfit when they signed him just means that they shouldn't have gone for him in the first place.
Yeah, but equally, I could say, yeah, but the thing is, Christopher Samba was also unfit. He shares the fitness problems, but the difference is that they signed him because possibly the reasons that you guys cited. Oh, he was an all right Premier League centre back 7 years ago. He might be all right. And in terms of what Josh said about him providing experience, I would say who did you say was in the side, like Clint Hill, Tal Ben Aim,
Neda
Manua.
And then Manua. I would say that the only thing that those defenders provided potentially was actually experience in the Premier League. Perhaps not at top, obviously not at like an excellent club, but QPR weren't an excellent club. They just wanted people who had played in the Premier League, of which all three of those players had done. Like
well,
you say,
Hill
not to a high level.
Just had a couple of years only with QPR. Neda Manua was just in the sort of lower reaches of the Man City squad, and Tal Ben Haim had spells at Bolton and then spent most of his time at Chelsea on the bench.
But they all had Premier League experience. They'd all
but not the experience that Christopher Samba had for a long period of time at a half decent side, because Blackburn were pretty good when he was there.
I'm not entirely sure that's entirely fair. I think that they weren't looking for somebody who had led a Premier League side for like 300 games. I think they wanted people who had played in the Premier League, knew how the Premier League worked, and I don't think you need to have played like 300 games in order for that to be the case. I think.
I'm saying that you have to play 300 games. It's just the fact that you have that experience, you have that I don't know, that sort of English mentality of being able to grind out those results when you need them most. And he was a crucial part of that Blackburn defence for a long period of time. And maybe 300 games or however long isn't important in itself. But if you think about how long he was able to sustain that for, there's no reason why that experience couldn't have helped QPR progress. Obviously, it didn't. But if you think about making the signing, there's no reason why it wouldn't have worked.
I feel like we should round this off here, because very fair points, and I don't really want to speak much more about Chris Samba because he's been seen training with the Villa squad.
Have you guys not learnt from Jody and Lescott?
No. Well, David Moyes bringing in Lescott. Lescott obviously loves relegations, but he loves having the weight off his shoulders. So, what do you at home think? Do you feel Chris Samba was the best pick? Do you think it was Mitroglou or Fellaini, or was it someone else? Let us know in the comments below. We know you won't, because no one watches this. But until the next time, thank you for watching. This has been the Dugout Debate, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. For more footballing content from In the Dugout, like, follow, share and subscribe. And don't forget to check out our Facebook, Instagram and Twitter pages.